Howdy, ice nerds. I'm going to talk about ice again. I love talking about ice. If you've watched this channel much at all, you probably know that I go for a clear ice cylinder typically, but some people really prefer a sphere. Don't ask me why. So today I just thought I would go through a few methods to get yourself a clear ice sphere. If that's what you're into, let's go. So there are basically three ways to get an ice sphere. This applies really to any shape, but if you have one of those stampers, you could stamp it. So like one of those big aluminum sphere press things. I don't happen to have one of those. They're sort of crazy expensive. You could carve it, or you could use a mold. Now, carving it can be pretty fun. You'll need some clear ice. You'll need like an ice chipper of some kind. You'll need something to hold on to the ice, like gloves. I have this silk fiber-free cloth thing that I got somewhere as a swag. It works pretty well. And you will also need some time, and it's not the most efficient way to get clear ice, but it is pretty fun. You'll end up with sort of a rustic sphere or a rough sphere, depending on how much time you put into actually smoothing out all the edges, but, you know, pretty fun. But molds are the easiest and the most common way. I have a few different ice sphere molds I've collected over the years, mostly from thrift stores. I've got this 6-sphere mold that makes pretty small spheres. It just doesn't work great, but it works okay. And I have these slightly larger individual sphere molds. And just recently I got some free stuff. It's a clear ice mold making sort of system by someplace called Samuel World. There's actually no branding on it at all, which is kind of weird. I think it's from China. I'm guessing it must be a Chinese thing, but I figured I'd try it out and see how it worked. Let you guys know if that's something you're interested in. Now, it's something like $35 or $40 on Amazon, which isn't terrible. And I will leave a link down there if you want to get one, although I am not affiliated with them. They're not paying me, and I get nothing if you follow that link. So, you know, just do whatever you want. But before we get to that, let me just show you some other methods for making clear ice spheres with a mold. So one pretty common sphere mold is one like this. It's in two parts. One goes on top of the other. There's a hole on top to pour the water in. If you put this just straight into the freezer, obviously they won't come out clear. And the other issue I have with these is when the ice expands, it tends to separate the two layers and you get a sort of, I don't know, oblate spheroid, a sort of egg-shaped ice instead of a nice sphere. So you have to figure out some way of like clamping these down or weighing down the top or something like that. A bit of a pain. But if you do want them to be clear, you can always put these into your cooler, into your igloo cooler that I'm sure you have at home for clear ice. Put it in upside down so that the holes are on the bottom. Make sure it's up off the bottom of the cooler, and you should be able to get some clear ice that way when the top freezes first and the bottom with all the impurities will freeze last. You just have to make sure that the water stays in the mold when it's flipped upside down. But it works pretty well. But again, these are pretty small spheres which work okay like in a Collins class, but I mean, they're not my favorite. Another method that works pretty well, and this is what Camper English does, is he'll get like a smaller ice sphere mold, and he'll put it inside of like an insulated mug, like an insulated thermos kind of mug. Basically, you fill the mold and you fill the thermos, and then you have to get the mold on top without letting all the water come out of the mold. I have a little difficulty with this. I have a little trouble not spilling water everywhere, but I'm sure I just don't have the right combo of mold and thermos. Camper English actually has specific ones that he likes to use. I'll leave a link to his website where you can check out his actual recommendations. If you're not aware, Camper English, of course, is the one who invented this whole directional freezing method. He came up with it himself, and all these companies from China or wherever they're from who capitalize on this method by selling, you know, clear ice systems, they don't tend to acknowledge his influence over their business model. But anyway, that's that's neither here nor there. It would be neat if he got a little credit, you know, so here I am giving him credit. Now, onto this other newfangled clear ice mold making gadget. It's basically a tiny cooler. This is like an insulated part. There's a big thick insulation there. This plastic bit fits in. That's where you put the water. And then there's this mold. It's a 2-part silicone mold that sort of nestles together. And then you just put it on top like that, put it in your freezer. Now, it's kind of a clever design. It does sort of get rid of the problem of the 2 parts of the mold separating, because they're sort of captured inside of this cooler. So that's kind of neat. But how does the ice look? Yeah, so the ice spheres do come out pretty good. A couple little bubbles in there, and they do have these little nubbins on the end from the holes in the top and bottom of the mold, but those are easy to cut off. It also, you do get a little seam around the equator, I guess, where the mold doesn't exactly nest together correctly, but these are minor things, which this would probably melt right off. And they're pretty big. The ice spheres themselves are pretty good size. Like, not bad. Not bad. In terms of ice, not bad. You know, to reduce bubbles further, you can put warm water into the cooler. That should slow down the freezing process. That should decrease bubbles. It's definitely not necessary to use boiling or distilled water or any of that stuff. Now, one other thing I'd like to point out is you don't have to use the mold. You can leave the mold to the side, fill this with water, put it in the freezer, and you'll get a pretty nice ice chunk out of this. It's a lot smaller than the ones from the cooler, but it's also like a little easier to deal with. By the way, I got a new Japanese flush cut saw. It works pretty well for cutting the ice. It does take kind of a long time. I ended up resorting to the serrated knife at the end, but it worked pretty well to cut this small chunk in half, which is actually how I got the blanks that I was using to carve the ice into a sphere that you saw earlier. So anyway, this seems like a pretty clever design. If you like spheres, you only get 2 at a time, but you know, that's not so bad for home use. I've been sort of digging using it without the sphere molds to get, you know, smaller, more manageable ice chunks to cut up. That's been kind of fun. So I guess I could recommend it, though this is the only one I've ever tried. I personally will probably stick with cylinders and hexagons and stuff, because that's fun for me. Anyway, you do you. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.